Welcome to all.
I, at this time, am very pleased to introduce Pastor Tom Orth, who's with Grace Lutheran Church, and also Reverend Bill McClure, who is the rector of Trinity Episcopal Church. And then the Reverend, is it Will or Bill?
Will is fine.
Will, okay. The Reverend Will Rayment, who is the pastor of First Presbyterian Church. And they're going to talk to us today about how COVID-19 has impacted their churches. And as most of us know who attend some of these churches, it's had a great impact on everyone. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. Like I said, as you have questions, write them in the chat room and we will take it from there. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and he's going to start the discussion.
Well, actually, Bill McClure and I were in a meeting in March when the governor's stay home, stay safe order came out. And it was a rather, I think it was a Thursday afternoon, wasn't it, Bill? It was the Peace Coalition.
Yeah.
So we started our conversation right there of what we were going to do. And my initial reaction was that we needed to follow it, stay home and stay safe right away. And I guess I would turn it over both to Bill and Will to how you responded to that first announcement of it.
Initially, I had thought that we would meet that following Sunday. This was, I believe, March 12th was the day of the meeting. So the following Sunday, my initial response was we would meet on Sunday, touch base as a congregation, and then move into a time of hiatus. The Episcopal Church in Michigan is referring to it as an hiatus. But I talked with our deacon, who is a pulmonologist, Dan Maxwell, and he said I would just do it now. So following Tom's lead and the advice of our pulmonologist deacon, we decided that we would close our building at that point, while at least worship and gathering in large groups. The actual closing of the building came with the directives of the bishops that developed soon thereafter.
At the Presbyterian Church, right after I had heard, we had an emergency session meeting right after that first service thereafter. And the decision was close down the church. We need to keep people safe. That was the important thing. And what we did is we set it up so that we would have a tentative opening at a later date if that didn't come to pass, that we would actually, originally we decided that we would come up with a tentative opening, and it just never materialized until the last session meeting, which we had on Zoom this last month in May. And then we said, okay, we have a tentative opening on the 21st of this month. And so we've got another session meeting just before that occurs on next Tuesday. And at that point, we'll, if we feel that the conditions aren't right to continue an opening, then we will go ahead and determine it at that time. And so right now it looks likely that we will be opening on the 21st. But yeah, it was a shock at the time. And of course, nobody really knew what all of this meant or how, we should deal with it. So immediately we didn't come up with any real plan except that we wouldn't have a service. And it took a little bit of running around and trying to figure out what was going to work over that next week before we could even put out a video service. So yeah, it was at that moment when we heard in that first session meeting, it was, I wouldn't say panic, but it was to the point where we just said, let's be careful, let's do what's safe and do it now.
Yeah, I think you characterized several things, Will, of the unknowing of all this. I mean, continuing throughout what's been going on for these last 3 months now is the unknowing of it and the changing of it on a very frequent basis. I remember a number of conversations I had with Bill McClure, and it helped me understand that the closing down was as much about other people and their safety as about our own safety. Yeah. And it was about not overwhelming the hospital systems with too many people getting sick. Yeah. And so what's been interesting is I didn't go back to the original orders from Governor Whitmer, but the number of the recent ones have a paragraph in there that has an exclusion for churches. It says the owners of buildings or people going to church, traveling to church, or attending a religious worship service will not be charged under anything.
Right.
And so for me, it became, how can we care for the community as well as our members? And part of it was what sacrifice are we willing to make for the good of the whole? And so, again, as I said, it was a conversation with Bill McClure that really helped me see that way. And it's been hard to think about it some in that way too. Grace did close that first weekend, on the 13th, or I guess whatever it was, 14th and 15th of March. It was a lot of calling people up and letting them know. We have a large email list of 130 some, but there are also a number of people that don't have email and that we had to contact, but we made the decision very quickly to go ahead and immediately to do that. And then, Will, you referred to the next thing of what do we do now? And since I think of the three of us, you were the first one to do something, why don't you describe what you did as far as providing worship opportunities for people?
Well, what I decided to do is I would create a video that would be as close to what our regular service was like as possible. So what I did is I wrote a sermon. I had our organist actually play the piano, record it, and then send me the video of that piano recording. And then I sent that to our hymnist, David Usher, who some of you may know, and he listened to it and sang and just recorded his singing. So when I got all that back, I got a video editing program and meshed those two together so that we could have hymns during the service that were sung, as recently as possible. We had a prelude, a postlude, but instead of an offering, since we weren't having an offering during the service, we had an interlude. And so in place of the interlude, what I would do is I went around the church and I took pictures of all the empty places in the church. And then as the interlude was playing, those pictures would come up. So it was, and it turned out, it was, I think we had probably 6 times the number of people that we usually have come during the service actually watched the video service online. And I thought it turned out pretty well. And I got a lot of response, people saying that it made them feel more comfortable in not having come, but having experienced as close as we could make it to an actual service. So,
yeah. So to be clear about it, it wasn't live streaming. It was something that was recorded and then posted online that could be viewed. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the way we've been doing it ever since. We haven't done we haven't made an attempt to, and part of the reason for that is actually technological. And because we don't have any Wi-Fi in the sanctuary or in Fellowship Hall, but also in order to involve all of the people that needed to be involved, the musicians, the liturgists, and everything else, and they were all from different locations, it was impossible to coordinate that to be all at the same time. At least we felt that way, or I felt that way. So I had them each, like the liturgist read it from home on their cell phone, and then I just edited the liturgy in, and the reading, same thing, and all the way down the line. And I thought the biggest problem for us was communion, but we had a video communion and in the Presbyterian Church, generally communion's once a month. So once a month we would include that with the service, but it would be a video communion. So,
okay,
yeah.
Bill, do you want to explain what you offered to your congregation then?
Well, initially, I am not a Facebook person, and I am not much for doing videos and things like that. So I was fairly intimidated by even that possibility. And our diocese was quick to respond. The bishop did a video live stream morning prayer on Sunday morning, still doing it at 10:30. And the National Cathedral is doing a full-blown spiritual communion via YouTube video, and including music, professional musicians and vocalists and the whole lot, with using professional equipment. So I directed my people to take advantage of that. I think there was a benefit in that they got to listen to the bishop more than they probably normally would, if ever, and kind of connect with the wider situation in the Episcopal Church in Michigan. And then the National Cathedral, again, connects them with even the wider church in the sense of the national church. And you might even hear the presiding bishop preach in that broadcast. John Meacham preached one day. You're likely to hear nationally oriented speakers and whatnot at the National Cathedral service. Well, I kind of drug my feet, I don't know how many weeks, and finally Tom and Bill Rayment and my colleagues in the Episcopal Church were doing at the least Facebook Live worship videos, and I wasn't. So I finally took the plunge. I started on Facebook, just do a live, sitting right where I am right now, looking at you, and leading worship along with Deb, my wife, who read lessons and such. And then I eventually would move to an application called StreamYard that the diocese was using. It allows me to bring in other webcams so readers can come in on the same live broadcast. And I can also simultaneously stream to both Facebook and YouTube. So that's what we've been doing. And it's been a real technological plunge for me. And I think at the least, when we get to where we can gather in a more normal sense, this will be a learning that I and we can take with us into the future. So that's kind of what we have been doing. I've expanded it to, I do a noon Bible study, prayer now, and I meet with the board. I'm sure others of you are doing those things too, via Zoom. So it's certainly been a technological learning and learning to connect in different ways, and as a church, learning how we are connected even if we can't physically be together. So.
Well, what we did at Grace was for a couple of weeks, nothing. And then I grabbed my cell phone and put it on a tripod and recorded myself. I put the cell phone in the wrong position, so the picture was smaller than it could have been, and sound was terrible. One of the interesting experiences for me in this has been learning, as Bill talked about the technology, but being willing to try new things, and each week add one thing, tackle one issue, and make an improvement. And so we have ended up, as Will Rayment has talked about, is recording a worship service, and then with editing, putting it together and putting it online. As Will also talk about, that's a very labor-intensive process, and you can spend an awful lot of time doing that. And so we are now moving toward live streaming our services, and with that, then we'll be able to have a recording that can be on YouTube or Facebook after that. But it's been interesting to learn the technology, and as I said, for me, something to have come out of this experience is to be able to try something and to find one thing to improve at a time. A couple of weeks ago in a sermon, I mentioned a saying from one of my seminary professors that has always stuck with me, and this is something like 20 years ago. She would say, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. And to me, it meant that you do it to the best of your ability and then you work on it from there. But that has been interesting. And I think all of us have experienced the number of views that we've had of our online things have been significant, more than our typical Sunday morning attendance. And so it's been interesting how we've been reaching people that we weren't reaching before. One of the challenges that I felt at Grace that we had to be aware of and try to attempt to deal with is we send out something like 130 or 140 emails to people. I'm quite impressed how this congregation has emails despite its age, but we also have 30-some people who don't have email and as a consequence don't have internet. And that's been an issue to deal with too, of how to keep people connected when they're not connected electronically. And so we have worked at that. I will say what we've done is that we mail out our bulletin, which has changed from being just a sort of announcements to being our whole worship service has been in there. And we are sending that out 30-some a week. So people at least see that and have that connection to doing. And so how have either of you dealt with the people that aren't electronically connected?
Yeah, that's been a big challenge. The keeping in touch with people who don't have. Whoops, sorry about that. Yeah, that I shut that off.
Call from wireless caller.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, basically, Tom and I share an administrator. So I just said to my administrator, what's Tom doing as far as people who don't have email? So we're kind of doing the same thing, I think.
Yeah, I'll talk.
And one thing that we did do is we established callers to call a number of people on a list so that everybody on the church list gets a call from somebody on a regular basis. So they can pass along information that they may receive via email that some of these other people do not. And I starred all the people on the list that did not have email or access email so that the callers would know that they would might need to get information more quickly than people who have received it via email. So that's helped too, I think, for people to get the communication and touch base with the church.
Yeah, we've been trying to stay connected with everyone in just about every way we can. Of course, through the mail, through email, and video online. During the week, we send out, in the middle of the week, we send out a what we call the fellowship newsletter, which takes the place of like the news and announcements that we would have normally during the service and keeps people informed of what's going on. I actually I try to call through the whole directory every 2 or 3 weeks so that we stay in personal touch with everyone in the congregation. That takes time that I wasn't doing before, but I'm thinking I will continue actually after we return to normal on that.
Bill, as soon as you know what normal is, I'd like to know.
I don't think there is going to be a normal. It's going to take us a while to figure out what that is. Also, instead of just doing the one service on Sunday, I would put out a midweek message, and actually just going to discontinue that. This is the last week I've done it because I need time to put on the regular or the in-person service that we're going to be starting on the 21st. But so I'd have a midweek message, which would be fairly short. It would be about 10 minutes long at the most, with a prayer and a reading and a little talk about that. Yeah, so we've also still got the Tartan, which is our newsletter, which goes out on a monthly basis. And most people receive that online, but of course, people that don't have an email address, we mail that to them personally. So it comes through the mail. So we try to stay in touch on all of those levels. Telephone, we stay in touch on online and email and telephone. Did I mention telephone already? So every way we can, for sure.
Well, we could take a moment right now and see if there are any questions.
I don't have any questions that have popped up, but I have one. You've talked about the successes and challenges of doing this through technology, but to some degree, it's been kind of nice to have that there as a fallback. And I'm wondering, are all of you planning to continue to offer your services either live or video past the point where we're all cleared to come back, whenever that is?
I'll answer for Grace. Yes, we're going to. As I said, we are anticipating restarting worship services this weekend. And we did a survey online, and again, a mailed survey to congregation members. And about half, not all the way to half, but about half the people are ready to come back, and as many are not ready to come back. And so we need to be able to continue to offer them something. And so that is our plan.
That's good. What about Bill and Will? Do you have plans to continue this?
Like Tom, I think we're going to have to stream even when we re-enter the building and we're doing our social distancing prayer services. We're going to have to continue to live stream because of the people that can't yet come because they have health conditions and their conditions make them high risk for COVID-19. But then, I'm thinking if we have that capability and we're doing that for a period of time, why not continue it? I mean, you've always got people that can't make it. You've always got people that, you may even have some people out there that like to connect with you online, maybe a lot because they can turn you off when they want to or whatever, or they can sit in their PJs or they can do whatever, that may never set foot in the building. And so you're reaching with a message and a worship, if you will, people that may not otherwise ever get that. So I think it behooves us to continue it once we do that in the time when people are not able, a significant number of people are not able to come. Even when they're able to come back, I think it would benefit us to continue that. And if we're already doing it and we have the capability, I certainly can't see a reason why not.
Okay.
Yeah, like Bill and Tom, we intend to go ahead and continue a form of the service online that's available. Now, we don't have the capability to live stream actually at this time because of no Wi-Fi in the sanctuary. But our intention is to record the sermon in advance and the pastoral prayer and some of the liturgy, put some package together, but won't have any music in it that would be presented online on YouTube, Facebook, etc. And part of the reason for not doing the music on that video is because that is the most intensive part of editing for creating a video. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we don't have any other questions. Tom, do you want to move on with the discussion then?
Okay. I want to take for a second and talking about I guess, the support or direction that our denominations have given. Bill alluded to it a bit, but because of the structure, the polity of their church, he was told certain things he could do by the diocese. And so I don't, Bill, if you want to address that or not.
Sure. I'm finding that we are in a unique place currently in that the Episcopal Church in the state of Michigan, there are 4 dioceses and 3 bishops. The Diocese of Western Michigan on the west side of the Mitten shares a bishop with the East Diocese of Eastern Michigan on the east side of Michigan. And then the Detroit area is the Diocese of Michigan. They have a bishop. And then there's a bishop in the UP, Northern Michigan. Those 3 bishops got together and they meet with the councils. There are councils in the Episcopal Church that are elected folk, lay and ordained, that come alongside the bishops and also serve in a way as a check and balance. Together, those bishops and councils have made decisions on behalf of the Episcopal Church in the state of Michigan. Interestingly enough, the official directive was more of an encouragement, and it was in conjunction with the bishop of the Northwest Lower Michigan Synod. Is that how it?
Yep, that's it.
So even the ELCA was in conjunction with us to start. But once our bishops made a directive, which is you have to do it this way, and where it says prohibit, you can't do it. Where it says encouragement, then you have some leeway, so on and so forth. Once those directives came out, the ELCA church could not stay in alongside of our bishops because their bishops don't have that kind of authority. So it's been a blessing for us Episcopal clergy in the sense that we don't have to make the decisions about, do we go into the church and do we have this group but not this other group, and because that's all been spelled out for us by our bishops. And we don't have to decide when we can re-enter the building, because we can't do that until the bishops tell us that we can. So for those clergy, such as Tom in a sense, and Bill Rayment, who have to make those decisions locally, I think that's a lot more stress on them. On the other hand, we're going to be feeling the pressure when you all are back in your building and we are not, because the entire state of Michigan's Episcopal Church is going to be cautious because it is the entire state. So that's different for us, and it's unique, with the exception of the Catholic Church. I think we're the only local Christian church that has that kind of authority dictated regionally. And the Catholic Church is so concerned sacramentally. The sacraments are so much, we're half Protestant. So our Protestant half helps bring into balance our Catholic half. Whereas if we were all Catholic, we'd be really nervous about not being able to provide sacraments to people. So I think that's pressured the Catholic Church to move forward in some form in distributing the sacraments. The Episcopal Church in the state of Michigan is not going to distribute communion until we are able to gather without social distancing. So I don't know when that's going to be, but even when we re-enter our church, we are not going to provide communion. It's considered to be too high of risk. And so we'll just be doing a prayer service, masked and at a distance. So it's been different for me. It's a blessing in that I haven't had to make a lot of decisions my colleagues have to make. But it also, sometimes it's handy to have some leeway as you apply things locally. that we don't necessarily have. In other words, I've got colleagues up in rural Michigan, over in Atlanta and Harrisville and around in more remotely rural places, that they're kind of wondering, why do we have to, I mean, we have 20 people in our church total, and we have no cases of COVID or anything, you know. So they're feeling that chomping at the bit, so to speak, on the part of their congregations. It has lended a solidarity that the Episcopal Church in the state is in solidarity with one another. And I think that's a good thing.
Well,
One thing I would say explicitly, excuse me, Will, for a second, is that the Episcopal bishops said, basically closed the church buildings and did not even want the clergy in the buildings except for very limited. And that was one issue that we were careful about when we started, is that the church building may be closed, but the church is not. The work of the church still goes on. And it certainly has been a difference. Sorry, Will, I jumped in there for a second. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to talk about the support of the church structure to the decision-making process. And as many of you may know, the Presbyterian Church is like upside down from the Episcopal Church with regard to structure. All the decision-making is made pretty much at the church level itself. And we get guidance from above, but and that was helpful in making decisions. But I actually don't make those type of decisions either. The actual decisions is made by our board, which is called a session. And the session board actually determines when we'll be open, when, and basically what happens. Now, of course, I can talk to the session and tell the session what I think it should be, but they don't have to listen to me. Yeah, so all the decisions are made on that level. And that first meeting that we had to shut everything down, you know, it was all of us sitting there and coming together in a consensus to decide what the decision making would be. As for what Presbyterian Church is built on a lot of levels. We have a general assembly, we have a synod, we have a presbytery, and then we have the actual church itself. And so some of that overall guidance on what you should do is put together at the General Assembly level. But if a Presbyterian church had decided they wanted to stay open through this whole thing, that church would have the right to do that. The overall General Assembly couldn't come down and tell them that they couldn't do that. So yes, so decisions are made on the lowest, on the closest possible level to the congregation and we couldn't go, because there is another level actually below the session, and that's the whole congregation, and they're actually the final word on everything. But because of the fast pace of this thing that went on, a lot of these issues couldn't be brought to the session, and the session is supposed to be the representation of the church body. So that's the way we made decisions going down the road.
And as Bill alluded to, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America does have bishops, has an episcopacy, but they do not have the authority over local churches as does the Episcopal bishops or the Roman Catholic bishops. And so the bishop of the synod advised local churches, offered his opinion, and certainly made resources available to us. But the local churches made their own decisions about when to close and when to reopen. But it's been interesting. I think as challenging, for me, the challenging part of it was gathering the information, and the information seemed to be changing or evolving so much over this period of time that being certain was impossible, but getting comfortable with the best that you had was necessary. So.
Tom, I do have a question. They've asked, are you making an attempt to contact the non-members who electronically attend your services?
Okay. Would either one of you want to take that up? Okay, I'll go first. Not explicitly, other than making information available to them. And I saw the question, and it sort of prompted me to think about how we can be more explicit about it. One of the things that's been happening is that some of the people who have been viewing our videos online, who are not members, have been making contributions to us, and that's been available through our website. And so the website certainly has some resources available, and we've done some reaching out to make sure people we knew about that we had email for and they were receiving things. But beyond that, it hasn't been explicit. So good question, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it's, in some ways it's not possible to reach some of those people, especially if they're viewing you through YouTube. You don't have any way of knowing even who that person is and how to contact them directly. What we do in our video is just put a little blurb in there during the prelude or the postlude that says, if you want more information about the First Presbyterian Church of Alpena, please please go to our website at blah, blah, blah. And so we try to make as Tom said, we try to make the information available, but in many regards, it's impossible to know who it is. The other place that we could find out is we also post it on Facebook, and sometimes people will comment or will like your video or whatever. And so we could, I haven't done it, but probably should, is just write that person a little note thanking them for viewing the service and letting them know where more information is available. So yeah, thanks for that suggestion.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add to that. I think the initial response has been to encourage folks to, make them aware of who you are and how they can connect. But it's less direct, I think, than a direct response. The tricky part is you have to, because of everything so interlinked, especially with Facebook, you just have to be, sometimes I think you have to err on the side of caution in responding, because you could run into issues with being connected to the wrong network. I don't know if I'm making any sense to you in that light. So that's a challenge. But I think down the road specifically, I think it's going to be important to afford the opportunity for people to connect with the congregation via the web.
We, the three of us, have a colleague who has been, can I kindly say, harassing us and maybe honestly say chastising us for not using all of the technology to reach all of the people. Particularly, she's interested in the younger generation. And I hadn't been envisioning doing anything online until I was forced to. And now, I have to say, I can see the benefit of it, connecting with people whom you wouldn't connect with otherwise, and simply providing something for your members for the reasons of whatever that they are not able to be at worship at a given time. So it's been a real educational process for me in that regard. The next thing I'd like to throw out is, how have the activities of the churches continued? How have community activities continued in the churches?
Well, we have our Sunday supper program, which was never prohibited by the bishops. But what they did ask is that we provide that food curbside, which just means you take it outside to the people, and that we refrain or limit ourselves to food preparation on site. However, we cannot entirely do that because we don't have an alternative. But in order to make a to-go meal, it presents less preparation to do a to-go meal than does the full served on-site meal. So small crews have been able to go in and prepare those meals and distribute them. We've been blessed too with donations from the local fast food restaurants that have donated sandwiches and things for us. And so that's enabled us to continue our Sunday supper feeding program. It has been a challenge to maintain the crews because a number of the folks are high-risk people that have volunteered on Sunday supper work crews. So that's been a challenge for Ellen, our director, our coordinator, but folks have stepped up, and some folks, are quite regular about it. So we've been able to do that. We do have our food pantry. I think it's been more difficult. We're kind of a hit and miss food pantry place where people contact us that kind of fall between the cracks, or are just and then we set up food for them. And because we're not manning the offices and they have to leave a message, I don't think we're doing quite as much of that as we were. But we still have that available. It just has to be arranged so we can take the food out to the people and arrange for a time to meet them. We have a prayer group ministry that we continue with that prays for all sorts of needs in the congregation. Our messy church people, we're taking crafts. We have this messy church program where it's this kind of intergenerational thing where families come once a month and they have a meal, and then they do a sort of a contemporary, different sort of style of worship, and then they do crafts together. And they actually took craft packets out, 2 of them, a couple times. So so we're continuing to be involved. I've got a member that serves on the Martin Luther King Junior Day Committee, along with Tom and myself. We continue to meet and be active in that regard. Habitat for Humanity, I'm involved with that, continues to meet, and I think the Restore just opened here not too long ago. So the church is still, and folks in the church are still active in the community. It may take a different form, and we may have to do things a little differently. But as our bishop reminds us all so often, the church is not the building. And just because the building's closed doesn't mean the church is closed. So, and I think that's evident. I think in the Christian congregations as a whole.
Yeah, fellowship has been the real hard thing to do. And I've always emphasized this during services, that the fellowship time after the service and fellowship just in general is as important as what we do in the service. And that's been something that's just been impossible to really, you can't do a potluck, you can't have coffee. With everyone coming together and meeting face to face, and even if you could, you can't drink coffee through a mask. So so there's so many difficulties that way. That has created a big disappointment for me that we can't do that kind of thing, because that's one of my favorite parts about church, is that aspect of it. But we have been able to maintain missions. I know our mission committee we do donations to various organizations. We have a caring cart that we keep in our narthex, and people will actually come to the church, and they have to call before they come, and we open up. I'll go and unlock the door so they can come in and deposit something in the caring cart, and then two of our members will come in and then take that to the place that it's supposed to be. We try to stay up on the traditional missions that we have within the church that way. Deacons have remained active. They've done a really good job of that, calling people on a perpetual, cycle. And we had one member, I don't know if you know her, Vi Pashley, who dressed around with a face mask and a sign and went to a bunch of members' doors and was outside waving the sign, and the face mask had a big smile painted on the front of it. So it was great, and that made Facebook. I think it went viral on Facebook. A couple pictures of her. So that was great. Our prayer group has remained active, doing what they do, and basically reaching out to people, but also keeping that vertical connection with God, but also keeping the horizontal connection with everyone else. So, so we've tried, but like I said, the most difficult thing and the biggest disappointment for me is that it's been almost impossible to do that face-to-face fellowship that we are all used to doing, and which is, to me, such a big part of church. So,
in that regard, some churches are doing Zoom coffee hours.
That's a good idea.
And so trying to get people connected that way. The thing that Grace has continued to do in the community as an activity is our little food pantry. And it's a box that's outside the church and now in the entranceway to the church too, which is accessible 24/7. And we've been putting food out there. And there has been significant demand during this time. And we have been going through a lot of food. We've also received grants and contributions from individuals, monetary contributions. The interesting thing is oftentimes people will come by and put food into it rather than being the ones to come with need. It's frequently people who the contributions are in there. And so that's something that we have continued to do here at Grace. And it's interesting that it's known because Grace is on a rather out of the way side street, but there are people that can find it. And it has been, as I said, used heavily. But we've been able to support it both with some United Way grants and some grants from the Northwest Lower Michigan Synod too, in order to do that. Are there any other questions right now before we move to, I think, what we'll end with probably is returning to in-person worship?
Tom, I'm not seeing any questions right at this point. So if you want to go ahead and move ahead. And then just to remind everybody, at the end, we'll allow a few minutes if you want to unmute your mic and ask a question that way too.
I have a question I tried to chat, but it didn't go through. Anyway, you answered one of them about fellowship gathering after service when you open up, if that's going to be or something that you can do. My second question is, when you do open up your service, will you require everybody to sign in order to meet the tracing issues? That's it.
Yeah, our plan is to definitely do that. In fact, but we were going to try to make it non-exclusive. Generally during a service, we will send, even before any of this happened, we would send around a sign-in thing that people would sign. But now we can't pass along a little sheet of paper from one person to the next. So what our plan is that the greeter, instead of being face-to-face, will actually kind of take a little roll or attendance as people enter. And if there's somebody that we don't know, we're going to ask them to contribute their name and some kind of contact information. So yeah, we're definitely going to be doing that.
Grace, as I said, is at this point anticipating worshiping this weekend. And we will have a spot where the members can check in. We'll have a list that we will simply check off. So we've got their contact information, but also we will attempt and ask visitors to provide us with contact information for the very reason of tracing it. If God forbid, someone comes down with something that we have to notify people. And I will say, it's been an interesting challenge to think about returning to in-person worship, because you go through, you get something set up, and you talk with a few people about it, and then there's something else that you have to add to it. It is just always the one more thing about being able to do it. And for example, Grace's sanctuary holds about 180 people on the main floor. And we're going to be having socially distanced seating. We'll be having somewhere around the high 30s. We'll be able to sit on the main floor. We've had to put seating available in our choir loft and make that available for larger family groups. And then even to have, we have the capability of it, we've done it occasionally, is to have overflow seating in our fellowship hall with a television so that they can see and view worship. But it's, see and hear worship. But it's been interesting to just figure out a lot of logistics for it. The flow of people in and out of the sanctuary. We had a person who went through and figured out where people could be seated so that they could walk down the aisles and still maintain that 6 feet so that people could get up if they had to. And so that has just been a really interesting challenge. And I know Bill McClure has not had to go there yet, but you have, Will. So do you want to talk about any of the things that you've dealt with?
Well, since I put together a plan for how services are going to look once we return to in-person services. And we decided that the sanctuary itself it would be very cumbersome to do a service in there because the pews, you can't move them around. And like Tom was saying, if you got somebody walking down the center aisle, that means just about everyone who's sitting in a pew has to sit 4 or 5 feet away at least from that center aisle. So what we decided to do, I don't know how much you all know about the Presbyterian Church's layout, but we have a fellowship hall which used to be the sanctuary, but there's no pews in there or anything like that. So what we're going to do is space chairs 6 feet apart in there that would usually have been used for fellowship. And it's not like chair here, 6 feet apart here, a chair there, but we're going to group them like 1 chair here, 2 here, 3 there, 1 here, 2 there. And so that when people come in, if they come in as a family group, they can sit together in those spots. So we're going to prearrange that. And the idea is that people need to come from the outside. We're going to have 2 doors open, and they can come from the outside and then go to the middle. And then when they leave, do the opposite of that. And I'm thinking one of the things that we're really going to have to stress is the idea that if you decide to talk to somebody, don't stop by the entrance or the exit because it's just going to create a backup. And you know how people are when you're leaving or when you're going somewhere, there's always you stop at the door to do the talking. So that's one thing that we're going to have to really try to discourage with regard to that. Face mask, one of the big things that came down from the General Assembly is that singing in church can be a problem, even with a face mask on. So we've gone to the idea that we're going to hum the hymns. So we're still going to have hymns. There's still going to be the piano for the hymns, but and I'm still going to make sure that the words to the music are posted. But so everyone is going to hum the hymns, but we're not going to have bulletins so that we don't have to worry about people handing them out or collecting them. I'm just going to use PowerPoint on the screen, and so everyone is going to have to go based on that. Unfortunately, I know some people's vision might and mine would be just as bad as anybody else's. Might have some trouble with that, but we will try to make that as clear as possible. Yeah, I wrote a whole list of procedures up for this coming together, and yeah, there's a whole list of them, but I'll let somebody else talk because this list is pretty long.
We did too. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
One of the beauties of being the cautious church and the solidarity statewide church is I get to wait and see how these guys make out and learn from their moving forward. Interestingly enough, Bill Hayes, we are not required to do a log. we are advised to do one. I find that interesting. We have a lot of prohibiteds and a lot of directives, but that's not one of them. They advise us to do that. And I think it is our responsibility, Christian responsibility, to do that, because if somebody is sick and that person has been exposed, they deserve to know about that. So I think it's our responsibility to be able to connect with people. Should we have, a case come about in the congregation or in the from the worshipers. So we're gonna, be doing similar things that you've heard with the face mask, the distancing, and I'm learning from those who are already doing it a little bit about how we might go about doing that. And a lot of cleaning before and after and during and all that kind of thing. So
one thing I would add, particularly address, is the issue of singing in the churches. And a lot of people have said, we miss the singing. And they want to do it, and they say, well, can't we do it with face masks? And the typical face masks, particularly the homemade ones that we have, really don't trap everything around you. The droplets that come out of your mouth when you're talking may not, or may be trapped, but what are called aerosols are not. And there have been studies done that show that when you are singing, because you're doing it with more force, you are projecting things in 20 feet, 27 feet from where you are. And so that's part of the problem. But as you think about it, in order for you to project like that, you also have to take breath in. And so in singing, you're often breathing deeper and harder than you do in talking. And so it becomes a double risk there. Our music director, for our recording for the last several weeks, we have been wearing face masks partially in preparation for when we return to in-person worship. And though David, for his job, has been wearing a face mask, as he said, 50 hours a week, he said he felt the difference of having to breathe in and breathe out through it to do the singing. And so that's a real issue that people are disappointed in. I think we're going to be doing something like Will does, and we'll have, even though we're in person, we're going to have recorded sung music during the worship so that that part of it is still there. One of the challenges in the Lutheran Church is that it has become a tradition to have weekly communion at every service. And as our bishop has said, a lot of people have thought a lot of ways about how to try to do this safely. And nobody's come up with a way that you can do the traditional communion safely and completely with both the cup and the bread. So what we have decided to do is what actually the Roman Catholic Church in this diocese is doing too, is that it's having communion in one kind. We're having communion in just one element. We're going to be using the wafers. It is a tradition of the church that is the same as receiving all of God's blessings, that you have all of the benefits by receiving it that way. And in fact, Martin Luther would say that it's the promises of the words that God gives that are the true elements, and it's symbolized with the earthly element. And then we're going to take it a step further because, quite frankly, for me to serve everyone coming to communion puts me in close proximity to everyone. Everybody else is going to be exposed to me, but I'm going to be exposed to everyone. And so what we're going to do is to put wafers in individual paper envelopes and put them in 1 to an envelope or 2 to an envelope or 3 or 4, and people will pick that up as they come into worship. And so I will ask them to hold the elements when we come to the time of communion, and I will, with widely expanded arms, bless all of them at the same time. That's about the best that we've come up with right now for that. There was one scenario, somebody said, well, you can come forward and receive the element. The presider would put it on a wafer, or put it on a cloth or a paper napkin at a table. They'd step back 6 feet. The person would come up and step up to 6 feet to get it. You can well imagine the time that something like that would take to envision just serving a small church of doing it that way. So we are going to communion in one kind and people are going to pick up their wafers that they will use that day as they enter the worship service. We are going to have a bulletin, and in our words here at Grace, that means something different. We're going to have a worship folder and our bulletin combined that we're going to print every week. Those are going to be distributed by the ushers to the seating spots in the sanctuary, and it will be for one service only. We'll ask the people to come out, bring it with them along with the envelope where the wafer was, and put it in a recycling bin. And so that's one thing that is going to, we will have. We don't quite have the ability to project as Will does. Well, we could have, but I'm only willing to tackle so many challenges at one time. So, and we are limiting the way that you can come in and out of church. We've had a number of ways that could come into the Grace to Sanctuary, and we are restricting the flow through one way. We're using a rather interesting sanitizing system after worship services, and it's called Transform. It is something that car dealerships have been using. They will sort of spray the cars, a mist that goes into the cars when they come into the shop. At least Anschutz is using it this way. And then they will mist it when the car goes out after their employees have been dealing with it. And we've tested it out, and we are comfortable with it in the space. But we could not imagine having to hand wipe down the sanctuary. That would just be incredible, having to do all the pews and everything, and just imagine where everybody has touched. I present a challenge to you. The next time you go to another room in your house, after you've gotten in there, try to imagine how many places and things you've touched. And that was subconsciously. And so we're hoping and trusting that this will be a way that we can provide some sanitization of our worship space and our public spaces too, so that we are providing some safety for the people. So, and we've got special instructions on how to use the restrooms, which is surprising, but there are, after you've used them, we've got sanitizing wipes in there, and we ask you to remember what you've touched and use it. One member's, what was it, a daughter, I think, sent up the instructions that her church was using for returning to worship, and it said, please don't use the bathrooms unless it's an emergency. And my response was, most of the time when you need to use the bathroom, it's getting close to an emergency. So I don't know how you can get away from having your bathrooms available, but then that becomes a place that you have to think about sanitizing too, for not just the next day, but for the next person that day. So that's been part of the interestingness of trying to figure out what can be safe to have worship again in person. As I said, I don't think we're going to have a problem with how many people we can seat, because so many of our members have said we are simply not ready to come back to worship yet. And we have 2 services usually. In fact, we're going to be asking some people if they would be willing to worship at their other than usual service to try to balance it out and have the most number of people possible. So I think I've covered most of the things that we wanted to cover, that we thought about, so we could open them up for questions. I think we've answered Janice's question about communion.
Right. I saw that question and you directly went into that. So now let's open it up. If you've got questions that you'd like to pose to any of our 3 presenters or all of them, just unmute your mic and we'll take you one at a time.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment, if I may. And my comment is what the 3 of you have said is quite pleasing to me. You seem to be approaching this very cautiously, and that's appreciated by both Susan and myself. Our experience in visiting stores in the area has been somewhat disappointing in a lot of respects. Half the people may be without masks. They aren't practicing social distancing. And in some cases, even the employees of the stores are not wearing masks. So I'm feeling comfortable about coming to church and looking forward to it. I will miss having coffee after church. And
certainly will miss potlucks. It's one of my favorite activities. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for your comment. I will say, we are requiring masks. At the advice of our bishop, the council, the governing board of this church went so far as to say, if people are not able to follow the guidelines that we've set forward, and mainly that's the masks and the social distancing and no physical contact with another person, we will end worship at that moment. And we're not going to risk people in that way. And with you, Bob, I've been in some places lately where not even half the people are wearing masks. And it's concerning because the disease is still here. It's still an issue to be addressed. And we need to do that. And we're doing these things as much for others as for ourselves. And that's just important.
This is Jan Charter. I have a comment, even though I'm not back to Michigan yet from New Mexico. I do still receive the emails from Grace, and Tom didn't mention this, but this is just, it's always better for people, I think, who are facing sort of the unknown to know what's going on. And the latest email from Grace it has a video and written piece on how things are going to be conducted in the in-person service. And so I think that's very helpful.
One of the things that we did this week here at Grace was we walked into the church and we recorded ourselves. I was recorded walking into church just to show the people what they're going to experience, because yes, I think as we've all said, it's certainly going to be new, from having to log in to trying to touch as few things as possible, to being seated in not your usual seat, unless you get there early, Susan. And we actually sent out a suggestion that people give more time to come into church, because with that social distancing, with taking a time to just get checked in, it's going to take a little bit more time. And so that's church is just going to be different. And I've been using a mask that has a clear panel in front of my lips, and I was told that I don't need to do that because I steam it up too much with all the hot air. And so I can use a regular face mask and it will be slightly more comfortable for me. One of the hints I'll give you about face masks is if you can get one, and the ones I've been using are homemade, but they put a twist tie here at the nose, and it allows it to form closer to my nose and to my face, and that minimized the steaming of my glasses. And so that was helpful. The interesting things that we're learning.
I noticed on TV they're advertising a plastic shield that you suspend from the bill of a baseball cap. So I'm wondering if we could wear, I have a baseball cap with the Episcopal shield on it. I'm wondering if I could wear that and have the shield over my face. But then I'm wondering, I would have to find out if that's as protective as the cloth mask or not. And if you would ideally need to have both.
I might need to be corrected, but I believe in the medical industry, they still wear a face mask under the shield. So that would say to me that it's not a full protection unless that shield comes all the way down. I don't know. I don't know how that would work.
That is true at the hospital. When we need to be with a COVID patient, we wear N95 mask and the face shield.
So one probably prevents your expulsion, and the other protects from outside probably a little better. It's probably just a double protection, really.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
Bill, I'm surprised that you're
do the baseball cap.
Well, I'm surprised that you mentioned an Episcopal baseball cap and not a Batman baseball cap.
I have that too.
I'm sure you
Tape on the back.
A question, will you be providing extra mask at the door in case someone forgets one at the service?
Yes, we will.
Okay,
Yeah, we've got people making masks already.
okay. That's good.
So do we have anything else, Tom, that you want to cover before we wrap this up?
I really don't have. I'd ask Will or Bill if they wanted to share anything else. Okay.
What I would like to say from the Association of Lifelong Learners is thanks to all three of you for agreeing to do this presentation, because I think it was very informative and it's answered a lot of questions that we've all had about returning to our places of worship. But I think the thing that's been really heartening is the fact that you all have found ways to get the word to us so that we can feel like we have participation in our worship services, just like we were. It's not the same as being there, but we're getting the message, which is the most important part. So hopefully we will soon all be able to return to fellowship and all of those things that we enjoy about our congregations. But again, thank you very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. It's a great presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, for acting as the all host of this, and to Will and Bill, thank you very much for taking the time too and sharing.
Yes.
And for all of you for joining us, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
You
you
are-
very much. Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. So I will go ahead and end this session now, and thank you all for attending. And it has been recorded, so it will be available on our YouTube channel later. So you'll be able to look at it again if you feel the need to. So again, thank you all for attending, and we'll go ahead and end the session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.